Good day, Cal. Day one is over at the great G6 plus felon meeting. Now it's just the G6 plus friends. That's a great news, I think.
Well, you were wondering whether or not Trump would even show, and if he did show, should Canada let him into the country in any event because he's a convicted felon, and whether or not he would have a temper tantrum in the event he did show. And what he did is leave early.
Very early. And I think that's worth discussing. I mean, I find it shocking that he came and started pumping Putin. And then I thought, hey, I kind of understand why he's pumping Putin, and then tied it to Trudeau. Because the MAGA movement in Western Canada, which is a lot of influence from Texas, because a lot of workers here in Alberta from Texas, plays on the fact that Trudeau is a big enemy of the West. That goes back to 1979 through 1981 when Pierre Elliott Trudeau tried to stop the U.S. raping and pillage of our oil resources, of which Peter Lougheed had sold our pipeline company off to private hands to prevent oil not going to Texas. So I found it, Trump was telegraphing that he supports Putin. He has to answer to Putin, and he made Putin a big play on the stage. And then he catered to Smith by intentionally saying Trudeau was involved in removing Putin, therefore trying to draw allegiance to the MAGA movement here in Alberta, because they believe in the conspiracy theory aspects of, the power brokers to be, or what Trump is getting rid of in the U.S. So what's your take on that?
I think the whole G7, G8 is basically irrelevant. To spend, $600 million to bring these people to Kananaskis, close off all the roads, inconvenience all these people, and then have the number one decision maker walk away early just goes to show that it's a waste of time. And it's a repeat of what he did last time as well. And last
Yeah.
time when he walked away, he insulted Trudeau, which, good manners says you don't insult your guests. But, manners are something that, Trump just doesn't disclose.
Well, I think
You'll
he
re-
found himself outclassed by Carney actually at the meeting, because Carney let him do whatever grandioso lying and stage presence that Trump wanted, and then he just shut down the meeting by saying, "Hey, it's my meeting. Reporters, please leave the room." And bang, there, Trump had no ability to grandstand once that happened, and that was a great demonstration of how you deal with a bully. You don't allow him to control everything. You don't confront him with his lies and crap, because that's what he wanted. He wanted to make a big show of it. Just let him go do his bullshit and let him realize that he's not the center of attention. And when he wasn't the center of attention, wham, off he runs back home making a false allegations that it's to deal with the Israeli-Iran conflict. Today he actually said, like Macron lied, saying that, Trump had to leave to deal with the Israeli-Iran conflict. I don't really see that as a lie. I mean, Trump has to deal with it, but Macron didn't say it was Trump had to deal with it. He said there were some deals on the table, and I think the G6 is more important, dealing with the Iran wanting to stop the missile attack. So I don't know what you found out, but that's my limited research on that subject.
the problem was Trump didn't want somebody else predetermining what it was he was doing or disclosing what he was doing, because Trump does whatever the hell he wants, and he wants to make it clear that nobody knows his agenda except him, which is because he doesn't have an agenda. He just responds in knee-jerk reactions. And if you look at going into this G7, all contentious matters were not on the table. Global warming was gone, which was an important issue from the last one. The war in Ukraine was front and center, and Gaza was being ignored. And when Israel has now attacked Iran, and we should read it the right way, people say, well, it's Iran's war on Israel. That's not true. It's Israel's war on Iran. But
Or
what
more
that
importantly, it's Trump's war on Iran. Trump is the one that broke the contract that the international community had put in play, and Iran never broke that contract. They were more than willing not to have nuclear armament because it wasn't in their best interest. And I think Iran was being responsible and is still acting somewhat responsible in trying to deal with the nuclear power issue. I mean, if your bully is a nuclear power, you have to defend yourself. And Iran has the right to defend itself just the same as Israelis do. And Trump won't even admit that. That was
well,
part of the G7.
and going back to the statement before the meeting, one of their core missions was protecting our communities in the world, strengthening peace and security, countering foreign interference and transnational crime. Well, what do you call the war on Gaza? You know, it's, I hate to keep coming back to that, but we are witnessing live genocide. And what happens is the bombing of Iran now has focused the world's attention away from what the Israelis are doing in Palestine to what the Israelis are doing in Iran, and somehow justifying what they're doing in Iran, and therefore, I guess, justifying what they have done in Palestine. It's beyond me that the G7 leaders would not condemn the Israeli attack on Palestine and condemn the Israeli attack on Iran.
Well,
What
it's pretty
they
hard to condemn when you're inviting the known crime lord to your country that's a convicted felon and sexual predator. I mean, that's, you can't go and transnational crimes and claim you're for stopping world, war crimes and that when you're inviting a known criminal to your country to talk and discuss crimes around the world. That's hypocrisy at its finest. So the G6 has just isolated itself as being irrelevant, and I think it's more like the G20 now with new players. And I think after this meeting, they're going to have to set up new alliances, which was the basis and foundation of the meeting in essence. But I think there was better ways of doing it.
yesterday's press release, June 16th, 2025. We, the leaders of the G7, reiterate our commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. Well, then they go on to say, in this context, we affirm that Israel has the right to defend itself. We reiterate our support for the security of Israel. Now,
That
what
was
about
that Trump changed that, or he wasn't going to sign the initial draft, and that's a
and they then
meaningless draft. It means nothing because it's not the final draft anyway.
it's embarrassing. They then go on to say we affirm the importance of the protection of civilians. Well, it just flies in the face of everything that's happening in the world in the Middle East. Then they say Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror, which, when you look at it, Iran isn't bombing Syria, they're not bombing Lebanon, they're not bombing Palestine, they're not bombing Yemen, and so, anybody with any kind of common sense knows who the principal source of regional instability is. And then they go on about how we have been consistently clear that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So what they're trying to do is justify the unprovoked attack on Iran by saying that Iran is developing a nuclear weapon, where all the evidence is to the contrary.
Well, that was like Iraq. The invasion of Iraq was based on intel that said Iraq already had nuclear armament and the U.S. was going to go in. Well, that was proven to be a crock of shit, and nobody ever paid for that war crime. I mean, invading a country like Iraq for a false information, it should be classed as a war crime.
But if we can get back to their press release, they then state that we urge that the resolution of the Iranian crisis leads to a broader de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, including a ceasefire in Gaza. Now, you have to look at that, and for all the pictures I've seen over the last 2 years in Gaza, I haven't seen a Palestinian carrying a weapon. The Palestinians don't have tanks, they don't have rockets, they don't have aircraft. So the ceasefire in Gaza is totally up to Israel. And how does the resolution of the Iranian crisis lead to a ceasefire in Gaza? Like it makes, yeah, it's a horrible connection, which is a disconnect. They then state we will remain vigilant to the implications for international energy markets and stand ready to cooperate, including with like-minded partners to safeguard market stability. In other words, they're prepared to bomb the shit out of Iran in order to maintain the oil flow out of the Middle East and sacrifice the people in Palestine. It's shameful. And one of the things that I would urge anybody who wants to learn more about this type of conflict is Professor Jeffrey Sachs is on the internet on regular talk shows, and he is an American economist, public policy analyst, professor at Columbia University, and has been a director of numerous United Nations organizations and sat in high places. The other one is John Mearsheimer. He's also a university professor, University of Chicago. Those two gentlemen are brilliant, and they have some unique insights into what's happening and where it's going. And I recommend any listener look up those two individuals. That's John Mearsheimer and Jeffrey Sachs.
Well, hopefully a few of these people viewing our podcast will look it up. The other issue that I really wanted to talk about was Carney's performance at the G7. What's Carney going to be able to do today at day 2 in the conference? Ukraine is attending today, which goes to why one of the reasons Trump wanted to leave last night was he didn't want to meet up with Ukraine. Ukraine was going to talk to him in public manner, saying we're willing to pay cash for any weapons that you're willing to sell us. And because of whatever control Putin has over Trump didn't want to get into a discussion with Ukraine because he might have had to capitulate under the pressure of the G6 to cut a deal with Ukraine to give it weaponry. And this, to me, might be one of the underlying reasons that Trump vacated really quickly, was he didn't want to be put in a position of him changing his mind, because he can't remember what his positions are or changes on the flip of a dime. What's your take about, was he being a coward, Trump, not wanting to have a one-on-one meeting with Ukraine where he couldn't bully him?
Every time he has a conversation with Zelensky, it's the same. Zelensky is on bended knees begging for assistance.
Yeah.
At some point, you get tired of saying no, or I don't care, or I don't want to listen anymore. And that's what's happened. Trump just doesn't want to listen to this anymore. And he
Trump was on a telephone conversation with Putin for 2 days ago, and immediately after the conversation, Putin rained hell on Ukraine with more missiles and everything else while he was, kissing the ring of Trump or telling Trump what he had to do at the G7. I'm not sure which way it went, but it sure looks like Putin has a lot of control over Trump. And I mean, that's why the rant about, Putin should be at the G8. And,
I sort of think that you're missing the sequence of events here that are critical. You're seeming to forget the tactical victory that the Ukraine had in launching drones on the Russian airfields and destroying nuclear capable aircraft and bragging about it. And understanding when they did that, it was the day before they were going to have peace talks in Turkey, which kind of showed Russia that they're not interested in peace talks.
Oh, no, Ukraine's showing all the time that they're interested in peace talks.
No, but you don't bomb.
No, Russia was already bombing. This is, they never showed any respect.
Yeah,
and
but
the one thing was, Ukraine was smart enough not to tell Trump a damn thing, because Trump would have warned Putin, and then none of that would have happened. And I think it was sending a fair message. If Russia isn't going to honor any steps towards peace, Ukraine should not. They did. They lowered their guard and got bombed the hell out of. So to show that, hey, look, if you're going to be dickheads and not want peace, it's all out war. There's no gloves off. Gloves off.
So why are you blaming Trump for that?
Well, Trump has controlled the Senate for what, over 10 years now? The Senate in the U.S. has been blocking Biden from getting things passed to aid in Ukraine. Ukraine has done nothing wrong. The aggressor is Russia, and aiding and abetting Russia is Trump, and that was his power play. Now you see the next power play that Trump's doing is he's using Israel to try to get what he needs in the U.S. Trump needs to have power over the army and military in the U.S. And to get that, the courts have said, no, you can't have a fake war on drug and criminals crossing your border, which is fake. You have to implement military control. You have to have an actual war. So Trump is trying to figure out how to provoke Iran into making this a war that draws U.S. in, so that Trump gets the one thing he needs: total control of the military. Once U.S. is in war, that's the final puzzle in the key for MAGA to have a total regime power. And they can use that military power on the citizens of the U.S. or any other country. They can use it to invade Greenland. They can use it to send military up to Canada. And it all starts with Iran. If Iran can be provoked to attack a U.S. ship or military base, it gives Trump what he absolutely needs. And that's probably why he wanted to be in the U.S., is because he's trying to figure out how to get that power that he absolutely needs to be a dictator in the United States.
Let me back up
Prove me wrong.
No, let me back up to the topic that Russia attacked Ukraine more so in the recent past than before the Ukrainians attacked the airfields. That same scenario was pulled on the Iranians. They were in the middle of discussing a new treaty for nuclear control, and out of the blue, a surprise attack that took out nuclear scientists. It took out the people who were negotiating the treaty, and it basically ended any hope whatsoever that there will be any further discussions with respect to the nuclear.
And that's exactly what Putin was doing in Ukraine. They were peace talks, and Russia would keep attacking and sending ground forces to attack, as well as increase aerial attacks. So
Corey,
I know you seem to think it's Ukraine's fault they're in a war, and
I'm not saying anything about that issue. What I'm saying is, in the last month, there has been several sabotaging of peace talks,
exactly.
and the bombing of the airports in Russia ensured that there will be no peace talks in the Ukraine.
No, there were dozens of attacks every night and every day by Russia long before that.
You just told me it's been cranked up.
Yeah, Russia cranked it up. And
why did they crank it up?
Because they weren't interested in peace talks.
And why aren't they interested in peace talks? Let's continue. Let's follow it.
Trump wasn't giving any military supplies to Ukraine. So
then why did the Ukraine?
Putin stepped it up to ensure that without the supplies that he might be able to take over Ukraine. And that's the bottom line. The minute there's no supplies or military support from U.S., Putin figured he was ensured a victory. And that's what's going on right now. Putin knows that Trump is not going to aid in Ukraine defense, and that gives Putin a strong arm to cause a victory. And that's why he's not coming to the table. He has no intention of coming to a table to negotiate. He
Okay,
has been given everything he needed from Trump.
Answer one question. Answer one question for it. One question.
What?
Was the attack on the aircraft in the various airports around Russia, was that a brilliant tactical success?
It was absolutely brilliant tactical success, and it prevented lives from being killed in Ukraine because it took out a third of the air fleet that's been delivering guided air bombs onto Ukraine.
And did it embarrass Russia?
Absolutely, and they should be embarrassed that it happened.
And did it occur the day before the peace talks in Turkey?
Doesn't matter when it occurred. There was going to be no peace talks. Russia already set an ultimatum down saying you're going to give up all your lands and everything else and capitulate. And
follow
Ukraine,
follow the string.
You're dead. If you let Russia take over your country now, every Ukrainian that stood up against Putin is executed. And those that aren't executed are going to be under a puppet regime, and they're going to be attacking the neighbors and saying, like Poland's the one, because Poland was blocking food and agriculture exchange to Ukraine. So if Putin takes over Ukraine's going to be sent towards Poland saying, hey, it's Ukraine fighting Poland when it's actually Russia pulling the strings. And that's even more dangerous. So to pull a blind eye, I mean, look what happened, how Russia got to where it is. So Sochi was a world event. Russia put on one of the greatest money expenditures for a World Olympics. Immediately after the World Olympics, where Russia was thought to be a good world citizen, they invaded Crimea. Why? Because they thought with their good name, nothing would happen. Guess what? They were right. And it was planned well before Sochi to invade Crimea and take it over. When there was no response from the international community other than booting them out of the G7 or G8, they went on to see what they could take from the east of Ukraine. They managed to get it, and there was peace established along a war front that was ongoing battle for 10 years. Then they come along, nobody was going to arm Ukraine, so they thought they could take over all of Ukraine. It's called staged war. And Trump is doing that same staged war right now, dealing with Iran. The same tactics are being used, and that's where you got to be careful. And by Trump announcing that he wants to take over Greenland, you have to be careful. And saying he's going to take over Canada, yes, you have to be careful. These are how dictators stage wars to see if there's a response of meaning. If there's no response and they can get allies, they will do exactly what they said they would do.
So are you suggesting that we have a preemptive attack on America?
No, we have to.
How else do we justify your theory about preventive attacks?
Well, you have to do like Carney's doing, saying, hold it, we need
alliances.
We need new alliances, and that's what we're doing. We're building new alliances. It might be too little too late, but I mean, when you see Trump fueling the West to fight the East by blaming Trump, or not blaming Trump, but Trump is blaming Trudeau for everything that's going on with, the G7, and that Putin is this, savior and Trudeau's the enemy. He's playing in to get the oil provinces to support U.S. and leaving Canada. And he knows that there's a rift in the West to the East, and he's fueling it by the blame Trudeau effect. And it's worked very, very well since the 1980s to polarize Canada, and he knows that, and that's why it was intentionally put into the G7 meeting on a world stage to capitulate the MAGA movement in Western Canada to see if they will support moving to the United States. And that's the Smith agenda. And the MAGAs that support Smith. That's what's happening in Alberta. I had a phone call with a guy that I've known since I was young, and he's a MAGA Trump supporter. And you cannot talk with these people. It's like talking to a Canadian goose. You know, it ain't gonna stop flapping its wings and trying to peck you. That's what it does. And you can't reason with it because there's no brain cells there to reason with it.
The geese that I have at around hanging around my place don't act like that at all. You know,
you're friendly geese out here, they're Western geese.
That's right. Yeah, they don't act like that at all. And in fact, my neighbors hate me because I don't discourage the geese. But it's all in how you treat geese and how you treat people. And if you treat them honestly and fairly, then perhaps they'll treat you the same way. And if you look at, and you're right about the MAGA people, they're worse than the born again Christians. They're, you know, they've swallowed some kind of fantasy and can't see reality, and they latch on to one particular thing that they like about whatever the person is saying, and it becomes everything. And until that one piece of news is contradicted to them personally, they don't change. You can't change them. And the thing is, all you can do is hope that with the MAGA running the US, with the Republicans running both houses, they'll make such a mess of it that people will realize that kind of power structure.
Well, look at Alberta. I mean, it's such a mess out here in Alberta, and Trump even knows that. That's why he used the Trudeau slander, and it capitulates more support for Smith and Trump in Western Canada, and that's why it was done. And by him stomping out of that meeting, it says Carney from the East is not worth supporting. So there's a lot going on here that Trump's a master of media manipulation, and Alberta's got to be very careful, because you've seen on a world stage now that Smith's actions supporting Trump are generating Trump to facilitate, burning and fires in Alberta against Ottawa. And that was why he was fueling and stoking the fire against Carney, because Carney is Ottawa. And
I think we have to worry about distractions getting in the way of realities. Alberta's standard of living is one of the highest in the world. Their grievance.
Living is really high in Calgary.
It's high everywhere. And to sit there and go, oh, woe is me, because, I have a pickup truck that's, 1 year old instead of brand new.
$90,000.
Hey, somebody's buying them, and that's the grievance, that I don't have one. Somebody has more than I do, but it's all a distraction. Look what those poor people in Gaza have. Look what those poor people in Syria have, and Lebanon. They're under constant threat of being blown up. And
it's horrible. And I don't know. I think the G6 should have never allowed Trump here. It sent the wrong message to the world. Now, can the G20 that's here save the G7 meeting and have some real decrees come down out of it, or unite in a way that negates booting the felon out?
And you talk about how, people get away with things. You'll remember that the first ship that they were sending to Gaza, the Conscience, which was, the single boat with a bunch of concerned citizens on it, the Israelis hit it with a drone and set it on fire and almost sunk it. Now,
and there wasn't much news of that.
Well, first of all, they said there was no evidence that that the Israelis had done it. Now, after the investigation, the evidence now is the vessel was subject to 2 aerial attacks. There was no internal explosion that occurred. All damage resulted from external impacts. The fire on board was directly caused by aerial strikes on the upper deck, which triggered cascading structural failures. No high risk or flammable substances were found in the vessel. There was no weapons on board, and there was humanitarian aid on board. So that has not been made news.
No.
You know, Israel has the right to protect itself, but does it have the right to protect
No.
international citizens in international waters? And no one says a word. And once you let them start to get away with these continual attacks against international law, where do you draw the line and say, Israel, you've gone too far. You can't do this anymore.
Well,
what do they do?
It's a lack of teeth by the UN. I mean,
so we get to the point where the international community is almost ready to condemn these types of behaviors, and they attack Iran. And now they've a huge deflection, and now they're damaging a country. Everybody knows that the Israelis can put 200 aircraft in the air and bomb the crap out of anywhere within 1,000 miles. They're going to do it.
But it's also the same with Russia. I mean, Starmer pushed for Russian sanctions at the G7, and he hit a roadblock with Trump. The U.S. president complained that they cost us a lot of money.
There's thousands of sanctions against Russia. There's been thousands of. There's none against. There's none against Israel. Not one.
Yeah.
Nobody's even come out and said we're going to sanction you. It's ludicrous. You can't say international law applies for the benefit of the Ukraine, but doesn't apply for the benefit of the Iranians and the Gazans. International law has to be ethical, and it's not ethical. It's been destroyed.
It's not ethical that you got a convicted felon being a president of the United States. So I guess we know for a fact that there's no ethics and morals in the leadership of regimes that are, I don't even know the word to use. It's fascist regimes. There's no ethics. Criminal-oriented regimes. There's no ethics. So where does that leave the world? I mean, is it now time for the G6 to say, hey, we have to build a new alliance and try to be the enforcers of law in the world?
Well, it's funny when the Chinese sound reasonable. When they're supposed to be the big boogeyman, and they're out there calling for peace talks, end of hostilities, and yet the Americans are saying that they're the biggest challenge to America's power in the world. The Chinese aren't sailing aircraft carriers around the Gulf of Mexico. No. They're not off the shores of Hawaii with aircraft carriers. So it's the Americans that are messing with the Chinese coastline and complaining that the Chinese are responding. Again, it's a breakdown in international rules of conduct. It's going to stop, unfortunately, but what's going to happen is who knows where it's going to stop.
Well, I guess on that note, we should leave it for another session and see what date today brings out of the G7 meeting. I mean, G6 minus felon. I mean, it's going to be better without the felon there, but...
Well, the problem is half the people were coming just to have a direct conversation with him.
And they couldn't be bullied. I mean, that's the point, is here Trump couldn't bully anybody he's talking to, and that was why he left. He just didn't have that ability here that he thought he could muster.
Well, he also didn't control the press.
Right.
The press was controlled by who was let in by the host, which was Canada. So they don't have the softball questions by the fake media. Right. So it's another issue that he has. But I bet that he's going back to Washington. They've already started to move aerial tankers to the Middle East. You watch, there'll be aircraft carriers all of a sudden showing up in the Mediterranean again. And
Actually, I think I seen an article where they've actually, one of the aircraft carriers changed course to head there. So they are there already probably, and I think the real reason, like I said, watch out USA, because the minute you're at war with Iran, Trump has total control of your military, and he will use that on the streets of LA, in New York, to back the ICE movement of evicting fake criminals from the continent. And we got a problem coming the minute it's declared war on Iran against US.
last week, the British moved more warplanes to the Middle East. This
Yes.
week, Trump signed a tariff deal with them. The last time Britain and the U.S. got
Well,
together,
actually, there is no tariff deal with Britain.
well, it was announced anyways, whether or not it's signed.
It was announced, but there
Okay,
isn't
but that's
one.
that's not my point, Corey. My
Okay.
point is there's a collusion going on there with about moving military assets to the Middle East between Britain and the U.S. Whether or not the UK got a break or not will remains to be seen. But what we know is the last time they did that, they went into Iraq and they created one hell of a mess. So
Yeah, hopefully
they don't.
that's not going to happen.
Well, they don't learn from history.
No.
Like they should read their own history. And in fact, a lot of the issues down in the Middle East have been caused by, France and Britain dividing up, the Ottoman Empire. So it read your history. It amazes me. They repeat it.
Yeah, I unless we follow history, it tends to repeat itself, and that's not good. So I don't know. I'm going to leave it at that. I think we could go on for days on this. Let's see what today brings out of the G6, and maybe there'll be some decrees come that are positive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like we plan to do something.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
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 We'll
Bye.
talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.